success, influence, and resilience. Melissa Carter seemed to have it all as the CEO of a luxury retail empire. Her company, Carter's, was a symbol of excellence and sophistication, built on the promise of inclusivity and class. But a single moment changed everything. What happens when the very values you built your world upon are shattered in an instant? For Melissa, it wasn't just an incident, it was a reckoning. A humiliating encounter at one of her own stores exposed cracks in her company's culture and thrust her into the center of a storm that would challenge everything she believed in. Faced with public outrage, internal resistance, and her own doubts, Melissa embarked on a transformative journey. From confronting hidden biases to rebuilding trust, she learned that change isn't just about fixing what's broken, it's about reimagining what's possible. Along the way, she encountered moments of unexpected kindness, hard-earned growth, and the courage to lead by example. But would Melissa's efforts be enough to heal the wounds and unite her company, employees, and customers? Or would the pressures of transformation prove too great? Melissa Carter paced the polished hardwood floors of her penthouse apartment in downtown Chicago. The expansive windows framed a spectacular view of the city skyline, but she hardly noticed. Her thoughts were elsewhere. The silence in her home was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of the curtains as a breeze slipped through a barely cracked window. Despite the luxury surrounding her designer furniture, curated art pieces, and a kitchen gleaming with stainless steel appliances, Melissa felt the weight of loneliness. At 37, Melissa had achieved what many could only dream of. As the CEO of Carter's, a luxury retail empire, she was celebrated in business circles as a visionary leader. But her rise to the top had come at a cost. The long hours, the endless decisions, and the constant pressure had created a distance between her and the people she cared about. Lately, even her days off felt hollow. On that morning, she decided to step away from the boardrooms and financial reports. Her 6-year-old niece, Emily, was staying with her for the weekend, and Melissa wanted to make the most of their time together. "Aunt Melissa," Emily asked, looking up from the couch where she had been coloring, "can we go somewhere fun today?" Melissa smiled at the little girl. Emily's presence brought a warmth to her home that she had not felt in years. "How about we go shopping and then grab some ice cream?" Emily nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, please." Melissa opted for a casual outfit: jeans, sneakers, and a soft gray sweater. It was a far cry from the power suits she wore to work, but she liked blending in during her unannounced visits to her stores. They drove to one of her flagship locations on the Magnificent Mile. The store was a hallmark of her success, with its sleek glass facade and meticulously designed interior. Melissa wanted to see how it was performing, and her visits often helped her observe operations without the polish typically presented during formal inspections. The automatic doors opened with a gentle hum, ushering them into a space filled with soft music and the subtle scent of fresh flowers. Melissa scanned the store, noting the displays and customer interactions. Emily's small hand gripped hers tightly as they wandered through the aisles. "Aunt Melissa, look at that." Emily pointed to a rack of colorful scarves. "Those are nice," Melissa said, smiling. As they continued, Emily grew more curious, running ahead occasionally to marvel at shiny objects or whisper excitedly about things she liked. Melissa indulged her curiosity, enjoying Emily's unfiltered joy. When they reached the confectionery section near the exit, Emily's eyes lit up at the sight of a candy bar display. "Can I have one?" she asked, holding up a chocolate bar. Melissa glanced at her watch. "Sure, but let us pay for it first." The checkout line was busy, so Melissa decided to wait a moment and look around the store while Emily clutched her candy bar. She became engrossed in observing a nearby display of luxury handbags, making mental notes about its arrangement. When Emily tugged at her hand, they moved toward the exit. The sharp sound of an alarm shattered the calm atmosphere, freezing them in place. "Excuse me, ma'am," a sharp voice called out. Melissa turned to see a store manager, Julia Whitman, marching toward her with a frown. Behind her, a security guard loomed. "I need you to step aside," Julia said, her eyes narrowing. Melissa frowned, confused. "Is there a problem?" "The alarm went off," Julia snapped. "We need to check your bags." Melissa was about to explain when she noticed Emily's face pale. In her tiny hands was the forgotten candy bar. Julia's eyes darted to Emily and then back to Melissa. "Shoplifting is a serious offense," she said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. Melissa tried to remain calm, but her voice was tight. "This is a misunderstanding. My niece forgot to put the candy bar down. Let me pay for it." But Julia crossed her arms. "That is not how this works. Store policy requires us to check all items. If you have nothing to hide, you will cooperate." The murmurs of onlookers grew louder. Someone raised a phone, recording the scene. Melissa felt her cheeks burn, though not with guilt. Her casual outfit and lack of pretense had led Julia to make assumptions about her. "Ma'am," the security guard interrupted, stepping closer. "We will need to involve the authorities if you do not comply." Melissa's jaw tightened. Emily began to cry, her small sobs breaking Melissa's composure. "Do not cry, sweetheart," she whispered, kneeling to hold Emily. But it was too late. The arrival of 2 police officers turned the misunderstanding into a spectacle. Melissa tried to explain, but her calm demeanor was met with skepticism. When one of the officers took her arm to handcuff her, the murmurs turned into outright judgment. "I cannot believe this," Melissa muttered under her breath as they led her outside. The Chicago sun seemed harsher than usual as reporters and passers-by gathered, their phones capturing every moment. Melissa was placed in the back of a squad car, while Emily sobbed on the curb. The officers assured Melissa that her niece would be cared for until a family member arrived, but their words brought little comfort. Inside the car, as the city blurred past the window, Melissa felt a mix of emotions: anger, humiliation, and a deep sense of betrayal. This was not just an incident. It was a glaring reminder of how appearances could dictate assumptions, even in a store she owned. Her thoughts shifted to Emily. The little girl had seen her aunt reduced to a criminal in the eyes of strangers. Melissa vowed to ensure that Emily would grow up in a world where moments like this were less common. But as she sat in the cold precinct hours later, waiting for her lawyer to sort out the mess, Melissa could not shake the feeling that this incident was not just a humiliation. It was a call to action. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a seed of determination began to take root. The world had shown her its flaws. Now it was up to her to decide how she would respond. Melissa Carter sat in the precinct's sterile holding room, her hands resting on the cool metal table in front of her. The room was suffocating, its pale fluorescent lights flickering intermittently. She glanced at the large one-way mirror, knowing she was being watched. Her pulse was steady now, but a storm brewed beneath her calm exterior. The door opened, and Alex Grayson, her longtime lawyer and confidant, entered. His sharp navy suit and purposeful stride brought a sense of order to the chaos Melissa felt. He dropped a leather briefcase on the table and gave her a look that said he was already 2 steps ahead. "They just finished processing your release," Alex said, sitting across from her. "You are free to go, but the damage." He hesitated, gesturing vaguely toward the precinct walls. Melissa sighed. "It is already out there, isn't it?" Alex nodded grimly. "The video of your arrest is all over social media. Headlines like luxury CEO detained and racial profiling in high-end retail are spreading like wildfire. People are angry, and for good reason." Her thoughts immediately went to Emily. "What about my niece? Is she okay?" "She is fine," Alex reassured her. "I arranged for your sister to pick her up." Emily was shaken, but she is in safe hands now. Relief washed over Melissa, but only for a moment. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "This was not just an insult, Alex. This is systemic. I was treated like a criminal in my own store because I was wearing sneakers instead of stilettos." Alex leaned back in his chair, observing her carefully. "What are you thinking?" Melissa's gaze hardened. "I am thinking that this was not just about me. It is about anyone who has been judged unfairly because of their skin color, their clothes, or their status. If this can happen to me, imagine how many others deal with this daily. I need to do something about it." The ride home was subdued. Melissa sat in the back of Alex's car, staring out the window as the city passed in a blur of neon lights and reflective glass. Her mind was racing, but every thought circled back to the same point. This was bigger than her. When the car pulled up to her apartment building, Melissa hesitated before stepping out. "Alex," she said quietly, "can you come up for a bit? I need to talk this through." Alex nodded without hesitation. Inside the penthouse, Melissa sank onto the couch, letting the day's weight settle on her shoulders. Alex took the armchair across from her, his briefcase resting on the floor. "I built Carter's to be more than a store," Melissa began, her voice soft but steady. "It was supposed to be a space where everyone felt welcome, where luxury met inclusivity. But today proved that I have failed in that mission." Alex leaned forward, clasping his hands. "You did not fail, Melissa. You built something extraordinary. One bad manager's bias does not erase that. But it does expose cracks in the foundation," Melissa countered. "This is a wake-up call, Alex. If we do not fix this, Carter's will lose the trust of its customers, its employees, and its community." Alex nodded thoughtfully. "So, what is your plan?" Melissa straightened, a spark of determination lighting her eyes. "First, I need to face this head-on. No hiding behind PR statements or lawyers. I need to address the public myself. And after that, change," Melissa said firmly. "Real, systemic change within my company. I want diversity training, stronger hiring practices, and an accountability system that ensures this never happens again. Carter's is going to set a new standard for inclusivity." The next morning, Melissa's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. The incident had become a media frenzy. News outlets replayed the footage of her being handcuffed outside the store, while commentators debated the implications. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like "Justice for Melissa" and "End Racial Profiling." But there were also critics who accused her of using the incident for personal gain. Melissa's publicist called early, her voice taut with urgency. "Melissa, we need to release a statement immediately. The narrative is spinning out of control." "No," Melissa replied. "No prepared statements. I will hold a press conference." Her publicist hesitated. "Are you sure? These things can get messy." "I am sure," Melissa said firmly. "This is not about damage control. It is about accountability." That afternoon, Melissa stood on the steps of Carter's corporate headquarters. A podium had been set up, surrounded by a sea of reporters and flashing cameras. The hum of murmurs quieted as Melissa approached the microphones, her head held high. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. "By now, many of you have seen the footage of my arrest at one of my stores. What happened to me was humiliating, but it was also revealing. It exposed biases that I refused to ignore." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I am the CEO of Carter's, a company built on the values of excellence and inclusivity. Yesterday, those values were betrayed not just by the actions of one manager, but by a culture that allowed such behavior to exist." Melissa's gaze swept over the crowd, her expression resolute. "Let me be clear. Carter's will not tolerate discrimination of any kind. Effective immediately, we are implementing sweeping changes to ensure that our stores are spaces where everyone feels respected and valued. These changes include mandatory diversity training for all employees, from entry-level staff to senior executives, and a revamped hiring process to promote greater representation." The crowd murmured, some reporters furiously scribbling notes, while others snapped pictures. "This is not about damage control," Melissa continued. "This is about setting a standard. I am not here to make excuses. I am here to make things right." As she stepped away from the podium, the applause was scattered but genuine. Melissa knew this was only the beginning. The real work lay ahead. Back at her office, Melissa called an emergency meeting with her leadership team. The room was tense as executives filed in, their faces a mix of concern and curiosity. Melissa stood at the head of the table, her hands resting firmly on its surface. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday," she began. "This incident has highlighted flaws in our company's culture, flaws that I intend to fix." She outlined her plans for change, detailing the new policies and initiatives she had announced at the press conference. The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. Finally, one of the executives, Robert Fields, spoke up. "Melissa, this is ambitious, but it is also risky. The board might push back, and we could lose customers. Melissa met his gaze without flinching. If we lose customers or investors because of this, so be it. I would rather run a smaller company with integrity than a larger one built on hypocrisy. The room was quiet again, but this time the silence felt charged with a new energy. That night, as Melissa sat in her apartment, she felt a sense of clarity she had not experienced in years. The road ahead would be difficult, but she was ready for the fight. She glanced at her phone and saw a text from Alex. "You are doing the right thing. Change is hard, but it is worth it." Melissa smiled faintly, her resolve strengthening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in a long time, she felt prepared to face them head-on. The morning after her press conference, Melissa Carter sat at her kitchen counter, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee. The events of the past 2 days felt surreal, like a bad dream she couldn't wake from. The world now knew her not as the savvy CEO of a luxury brand, but as a symbol of racial profiling in high-end retail. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues, friends, and strangers. Some offered support, while others questioned her decisions or doubted her sincerity. Melissa turned the phone over, letting the screen go dark. She needed a moment to breathe, but the world wasn't going to wait. Just as she stood to refill her coffee, a knock sounded at her door. Melissa frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened it to find a woman in her 60s holding a plain, white envelope. Her gray hair was pulled back into a tidy bun, and her kind eyes crinkled at the edges as she smiled. "Ms. Carter?" the woman asked gently. "Yes," Melissa replied cautiously. "My name is Linda Holloway," the woman said, handing her the envelope. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I wanted to share something with you. If you have a moment to read it, I'll wait outside." Melissa hesitated, unsure how to respond. But something in Linda's calm demeanor disarmed her. "Come in," Melissa said, stepping aside. Linda entered, her movements slow and deliberate. Melissa gestured toward the couch, then opened the envelope. Inside was a neatly handwritten letter. She began to read. Linda's story unfolded with poignant detail. Decades ago, as a young schoolteacher, Linda had been accused of shoplifting in a department store. She had forgotten to pay for a small notebook tucked under her arm while shopping. The accusation humiliated her, and the store manager had treated her with a cold disdain that mirrored Melissa's recent experience. But Linda's story took an unexpected turn. After being detained in the back office, an elderly clerk had stepped in. The clerk, a soft-spoken man named Mr. Harris, had vouched for Linda, insisting the incident was a misunderstanding. His unexpected kindness changed the course of that day, and in many ways, Linda's life. "He told me that people make mistakes," Linda said as Melissa finished reading the letter. "But he also said that how we respond to those mistakes defines who we are. That lesson stayed with me." Melissa folded the letter and looked up at Linda. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said quietly. "It means a lot." Linda smiled. "I saw your press conference. I know you're facing a storm right now, but storms have a way of clearing the air. If you need help weathering it, just remember there are people out here rooting for you." Her words lingered long after she left. For the first time in days, Melissa felt a flicker of hope. That afternoon, Melissa returned to the office with a renewed sense of purpose. She called an immediate meeting with her senior staff to brainstorm ways to address the cultural issues within Carter's. "We need to focus on more than policies," Melissa said, pacing the room. "We need to change the way people think, both in this company and beyond." Robert Fields, the cautious but pragmatic head of marketing, raised a hand. "Changing minds isn't as simple as rewriting the employee handbook," he said. Melissa stopped and faced him. "I know," she replied. "That's why we're going to start with stories. Real stories. I want to create a platform where employees and customers can share their experiences. Let's use those stories to drive home the importance of empathy and respect." The room murmured with cautious agreement. "That's a good idea," Maria Collins, the head of HR, said. "But we'll need to tread carefully. These stories could open wounds." "True," Melissa conceded, "but they could also heal them." Over the next few weeks, Carter's launched the initiative Melissa had envisioned. They called it Carter's Voices, an internal and external platform for storytelling. Employees shared their experiences of bias, inclusion, and moments of unexpected kindness. Customers were invited to contribute as well, offering testimonials about their interactions with the company. One story in particular caught Melissa's attention. It was from Rachel, a cashier at one of Carter's suburban locations. Rachel wrote about how the new diversity training sessions had changed her perspective. "I never realized how much bias I carried," Rachel admitted in her submission. "I didn't mean to treat people differently, but I see now that I did. The training sessions helped me recognize that, and I'm committed to doing better." Rachel's words were raw and honest, and they sparked meaningful conversations among employees. Melissa felt a swell of pride as she read the story aloud during a leadership meeting. "This is the kind of impact we're aiming for," she said. "If we can change even one person's mindset, we're making progress." As the initiative gained momentum, Melissa decided to take it a step further. Inspired by Linda Holloway's story, she introduced a mentorship program within the company. The program paired experienced employees with newer hires, fostering relationships built on mutual respect and growth. Melissa personally reached out to Linda, asking if she would consider joining the program as a mentor. To her delight, Linda agreed. "I've spent my life trying to pay forward the kindness I received," Linda said during their first meeting. "This feels like the perfect opportunity to continue that work." The impact of these changes began to ripple outward. Employees who had initially resisted the new policies started to see their value. Customers began sharing positive experiences, describing Carter's as a more welcoming and inclusive space. But the work was far from over. A small but vocal group of employees continued to push back, claiming the changes were unnecessary or politically motivated. Melissa remained undeterred. One afternoon, she received an email from a store manager named Greg. He had been one of the loudest critics of the new initiatives, but his tone in the email was unexpectedly conciliatory. "Ms. Carter," Greg wrote, "I wanted to apologize for my resistance to the changes. I didn't understand their importance at first, but after hearing the stories from my team and customers, I see now how much these changes matter. I hope to be part of the solution moving forward." Melissa replied immediately, thanking Greg for his honesty and inviting him to join the mentorship program. She saw his change of heart as proof that the seeds they had planted were beginning to grow. At the end of a long day, Melissa sat in her office, reflecting on the progress they had made. Her phone buzzed with a notification, a new submission to Carter's Voices. She opened it to find a heartfelt story from a customer who had once felt unwelcome in their stores, but now described a transformative experience. The last line of the story stayed with Melissa. "It's amazing how small acts of kindness can make such a big difference." Melissa leaned back in her chair, a faint smile on her lips. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, she felt like they were moving in the right direction. Melissa Carter walked into the Carter's downtown flagship store early one morning, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. The store was quiet, still waking up before the first wave of customers arrived. She had come unannounced, carrying a notepad and a lingering sense of responsibility. Melissa made her way through the aisles, inspecting displays, listening to the hushed chatter of employees preparing for the day, and absorbing the atmosphere. Something felt different, less rigid, more welcoming. The small changes her team had implemented were beginning to show, yet she knew that real transformation would take time and persistence. In the back corner of the store, she spotted Rachel, the cashier who had written the heartfelt testimonial for Carter's Voices. Rachel was rearranging a display of scarves, her expression focused but cheerful. "Rachel," Melissa said softly, stepping closer. Rachel turned, startled at first, but her face quickly broke into a smile. "Miss Carter," she said, her voice tinged with nervous excitement. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to see how things were going," Melissa said, "and to thank you. Your story on Carter's Voices has had a profound impact. It's already inspired other employees to reflect and share their own experiences." Rachel's cheeks flushed. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure if anyone would care about what I wrote." "People care," Melissa replied firmly. "Honesty and vulnerability have a way of resonating." Rachel hesitated, then asked, "Do you really think things can change? Really change?" Melissa nodded. "It's not easy, and it won't happen overnight. but I believe in the power of small steps. Kindness, understanding, and accountability, they all add up. Rachel smiled faintly. I hope you're right. Later that day, Melissa returned to her office for a leadership meeting. The energy in the room was more positive than in recent weeks. Maria Collins, the head of HR, was the first to speak. Our mentorship program is gaining traction, Maria reported. More employees are signing up, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. People are starting to see the value of these changes. Melissa nodded, her mind flashing back to Rachel's question. Can things really change? That's good to hear, Melissa said. But we can't lose momentum. What about the resistance? Are we still seeing pushback? Maria's smile faded slightly. Yes, but it's less aggressive now. Some employees are hesitant to participate in the training sessions, and there's a small group that remains vocal in their opposition. We've also had a handful of customers complain about the changes, claiming they miss the old Carters. Melissa sighed. We knew this wouldn't be easy. Change never is. But we can't let fear or discomfort hold us back. The resistance Maria mentioned soon became impossible to ignore. A group of employees organized a small but public protest outside one of Carter's suburban locations, holding signs that read slogans like "Respect Tradition" and "Stop Forcing Change." The sight of the protest made local headlines, drawing mixed reactions from the public. Melissa was frustrated but determined. She decided to address the protesters directly. She arrived at the store that afternoon, her presence turning heads as she approached the group. One of the protesters, a store manager named Greg, stepped forward. Melissa recognized him as the same employee who had recently emailed her with an apology. "Miss Carter," Greg said, his voice uneasy. "Greg," Melissa replied, her tone calm but firm. "I'm surprised to see you here. I thought we were on the same page." Greg shifted uncomfortably. "I thought we were too. But some employees feel like their voices aren't being heard anymore. They think these changes are being forced on them." Melissa took a deep breath. "Greg, I appreciate your honesty. But let me ask you this, do you think the customers who felt excluded before these changes felt like their voices were being heard?" Greg hesitated, his brow furrowing. "I hadn't thought about it that way." "That's the problem," Melissa said gently. "For too long, we've ignored the perspectives of people who didn't fit a certain mold. This isn't about taking something away from you or anyone else. It's about giving everyone a fair chance to feel valued and respected." The tension in Greg's posture softened slightly. He glanced at the other protesters, then back at Melissa. "I still have my doubts, but maybe I've been looking at this the wrong way." "That's all I'm asking," Melissa said. "Just consider the bigger picture. Change can be uncomfortable, but it's also necessary." In the days following her conversation with Greg, the protest quieted, and several of the employees involved expressed a willingness to engage in dialogue. Melissa took this as a small but meaningful victory. Back at headquarters, she focused on expanding the mentorship program and ensuring that Carter's voices continued to amplify the perspectives of employees and customers alike. During a leadership meeting, Maria shared an update. "We've received over 100 new submissions for Carter's Voices in the past week," she said. "One of them is from a longtime customer who had stopped shopping with us years ago because they didn't feel welcome. They're back now, and they're thrilled with the changes." Melissa felt a sense of pride, but also a renewed sense of responsibility. "Let's keep this momentum going," she said. "But we need to do more. I want to host a company-wide town hall meeting. It's time to have an open conversation with our employees." The town hall meeting took place in Carter's largest auditorium, filled with employees from all levels of the company. Melissa stood at the front of the room, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "I know the past few months have been challenging. Change is never easy, and I understand that some of you may feel frustrated or even uncertain about the direction we're heading. That's why we're here today, to talk openly and honestly about what's working, what's not, and how we can move forward together." At first, the room was silent. Then a man in the back raised his hand. "Miss Carter," he said, "why are we making such drastic changes? Carter's was successful before. If it isn't broken, why fix it?" Melissa met his gaze evenly. "Because it was broken," she said. "Maybe not for you, but for others. If we're only serving a select group of people, we're not living up to our potential. Carter's is meant to be a place where everyone feels welcome, employees, customers, and communities alike. Another employee stood. I get the intention, but these training sessions feel like we're being punished for things we didn't do. Melissa nodded thoughtfully. I understand how it might feel that way, she said. But this isn't about blame. It's about awareness. We all have blind spots, myself included. These sessions are about learning and growing, not punishment. As the meeting continued, more employees voiced their concerns, while others expressed support for the changes. By the end, the tension in the room had lessened, replaced by a tentative sense of understanding. That evening, as Melissa sat in her office reflecting on the day, her phone buzzed with a new notification from Carter's Voices. It was another story submission, this time from an employee who had initially resisted the changes but had come to see their value. Melissa read the final line of the submission aloud to herself. Change isn't easy, but it's worth it. She leaned back in her chair, a small smile forming on her lips. The journey was far from over, but moments like this reminded her why she had started. The weeks following the town hall marked a turning point for Melissa Carter. While not all employees were fully on board, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere at Carter's. Conversations that once simmered with resistance began to evolve into thoughtful exchanges. Melissa could feel it in the halls of the corporate offices and see it on the faces of employees during her store visits. The seeds of change she had planted were beginning to sprout, but nurturing them would require relentless dedication. Melissa sat in her office one rainy morning, staring out at the streaked windows. The city below was a blur of movement, a constant reminder that life pressed on regardless of her challenges. She held a cup of tea in her hands, its warmth a small comfort. On her desk lay a folder labeled Employee Submissions, Carter's Voices. Each story inside represented a piece of the larger transformation she was determined to achieve. Flipping through the pages, she paused on a submission from an employee named Carla, who worked at a suburban store. Carla's story described how she had struggled with the new training sessions, initially feeling defensive about the changes. But one exercise had forced her to confront her biases in a way she had never considered before. During the session, Carla wrote, "We were asked to step into the shoes of someone we'd unintentionally judged. I thought about the time I treated a customer differently because of how they were dressed. I didn't realize what I was doing until later, and it has haunted me ever since. That moment of reflection changed everything for me. Now I make a conscious effort to see the person, not the image." Melissa's chest tightened as she read Carla's words. Stories like these were proof that progress, while slow, was real. Later that day, Melissa visited the downtown flagship store again. The familiar hum of activity greeted her as she stepped through the glass doors. She had made it a point to show up unannounced, believing these visits provided a clearer picture of how the changes were playing out on the ground. As she moved through the store, she noticed small but meaningful differences. Employees greeted customers with genuine warmth, their interactions more attentive and less transactional. Displays were thoughtfully arranged, reflecting an effort to create an inviting environment for everyone. In the corner of the store, Melissa spotted a young employee assisting an elderly man who seemed overwhelmed by the self-checkout kiosks. The employee patiently walked him through the process, her tone kind and encouraging. "Take your time," the employee said with a smile. "These machines can be tricky, but I'm here to help." The man chuckled softly, his initial frustration melting away. "Thank you, young lady. I've never been good with technology, but you've made this a lot easier." Melissa watched the interaction from a distance, her heart swelling with pride. These were the moments that defined the culture she was striving to build. Back at headquarters, Maria Collins entered Melissa's office with a stack of reports. Her face was a mix of excitement and concern. "Good news first," Maria said, placing the papers on Melissa's desk. "Customer satisfaction scores in our pilot stores have risen by 15% since the changes were implemented. Employees are reporting higher engagement, and the mentorship program has connected over 100 pairs across the company." Melissa nodded, a smile tugging at her lips. "That's fantastic, Maria. What's the concern?" Maria sighed, pulling out a second report. "We're still facing resistance in a few pockets. There's one particular group of employees who've been vocal about their dissatisfaction. They've started circulating a petition to roll back some of the changes, claiming the new policies are divisive. Melissa's expression tightened. How many signatures? Fewer than 50, Maria said quickly, but enough to cause ripples. They're gaining traction online as well, framing their complaints as a stand against forced inclusivity. Melissa leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She knew this kind of resistance was inevitable, but it was frustrating nonetheless. Schedule a meeting with the leaders of this group, she said. I want to hear their concerns directly. The meeting took place in a small conference room the next day. Melissa sat at the head of the table, facing a handful of employees who had spearheaded the petition. Among them was Greg, the store manager she had spoken to during the protest. Greg shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but spoke first. Ms. Carter, we understand that you're trying to make positive changes, but some of us feel like our voices are being ignored. These policies were rolled out so quickly, and we didn't have a say in how they'd affect us. Melissa listened intently, her expression calm but resolute. Greg, I appreciate your honesty, she said. But let me ask you something. When was the last time we asked our customers how they felt? How often have we stopped to consider the experiences of the people who walk through our doors every day? The room was silent. Greg glanced at the others, then back at Melissa. Not often enough, he admitted. Exactly, Melissa said. This isn't about taking away your voice. It's about amplifying the voices that have been silenced for too long. Change is uncomfortable, but it's necessary if we want to grow not just as a company, but as individuals. Another employee, a woman named Denise, spoke up. I've been with Carter's for 15 years, she said, her tone wavering between frustration and vulnerability. I've seen so many changes, but this one feels different. Like it's forcing us to look at things we've never had to face before. Melissa nodded. That's exactly what it's doing, Denise. And I know it's hard. But think about the customers who've felt invisible in our stores. Think about the employees who've been overlooked because they didn't fit a certain mold. This change is about creating a space where everyone feels seen and valued. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Melissa addressing each concern thoughtfully. By the end of the meeting, some employees remained skeptical, but others seemed to soften. As the group dispersed, Greg lingered behind. Ms. Carter, he said quietly, I still have questions, but I'm willing to give this a chance. You've given me a lot to think about. That's all I ask, Melissa replied, offering him a small smile. The next day, Melissa received an email from Denise. Ms. Carter, the email began, I just wanted to say thank you for listening. I still have my doubts, but I appreciate the way you took the time to hear us out. It means a lot. Melissa leaned back in her chair, a faint smile crossing her face. These small victories were what kept her going. That evening, as Melissa reviewed the latest submissions to Carter's Voices, one story stood out. It was from a longtime customer who had returned to Carter's after years of feeling unwelcome. I came back because I heard about the changes, the customer wrote. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged. It's amazing how a small act of kindness can make such a big difference. Melissa closed her laptop and gazed out at the city lights. The road ahead was still long, but moments like these reminded her why the journey was worth it. Melissa Carter woke early, her penthouse bathed in the soft glow of the Chicago morning. For the first time in weeks, she felt a faint but undeniable sense of hope. Progress at Carter's was slow but tangible, like the first blooms of spring breaking through hardened soil. Still, the weight of her responsibilities lingered. She knew one thing for certain: there was no room for complacency. She stepped into her kitchen, where the hum of the coffee machine filled the air. As she poured herself a cup, her phone buzzed with an alert. It was a notification from Carter's Voices, the internal storytelling platform she had championed. A new submission had been highlighted as editor's pick. Curious, Melissa opened it. The story was from a young woman named Claire, a recently hired sales associate. Claire shared how the mentorship program had transformed her view of the workplace. I was nervous about joining Carter's, Claire wrote. I wasn't sure I belonged in such a polished, high-end environment. But my mentor, Rachel, changed that. She helped me see my potential and encouraged me to embrace my voice. I'm finally starting to feel like I belong, and I'm so grateful. Melissa smiled, her chest warming at the words. Claire's story was proof that the changes were making a difference not just for the company, but for the people within it. Later that morning, Melissa arrived at Carter's headquarters for a scheduled leadership meeting. The air in the boardroom buzzed with cautious optimism. Maria Collins, head of HR, began with her weekly update. "Our latest data shows significant improvements," Maria said, clicking through her presentation. "Employee engagement is up by 20%, and customer satisfaction scores continue to climb. But perhaps most importantly, participation in the mentorship program has doubled in the past month." The room murmured with approval, and Melissa felt a swell of pride. "That's incredible progress," Melissa said, addressing the group. "But we can't stop here. We need to ensure this momentum lasts. Maria, I want you to expand the mentorship program to include partnerships with external organizations. Let's extend our reach into the communities we serve." Maria nodded. "Consider it done." After the meeting, Melissa decided to visit one of Carter's suburban stores. It was the same location where Greg, the store manager, had once led a protest against the company's changes. She had heard that Greg's perspective had shifted since their last conversation, and she wanted to see the progress for herself. When she arrived, Melissa was greeted warmly by the staff. The store was bustling with customers, and there was a noticeable energy in the air, one of collaboration and inclusivity. Greg approached her near the customer service desk, his demeanor more relaxed than before. "Ms. Carter," he said, extending his hand. "It's good to see you." "Good to see you too, Greg," Melissa replied, shaking his hand. "How are things here?" "Better than I expected," Greg admitted. "The changes, they've made a difference. At first, I didn't think we needed them, but now I see how much they've improved morale and customer interactions." Melissa smiled. "I'm glad to hear that. It takes courage to admit when you've had a change of heart." Greg gestured toward the checkout area. "There's someone I think you should meet." Melissa followed him to a register where an older woman was ringing up a customer. Greg introduced her as Mrs. Daniels, one of the store's longest-serving employees. Mrs. Daniels was hesitant about the new training sessions, Greg explained. But she recently shared a story with the team that really opened our eyes. Melissa turned to Mrs. Daniels. "I'd love to hear it, if you don't mind." Mrs. Daniels hesitated, her cheeks flushing. "Well," she began, "there was a young man who came in a few weeks ago. He was dressed casually, sweatpants, sneakers, a hoodie. I'll admit, I assumed he wasn't serious about shopping here." She paused, taking a breath. "But then he asked me for help finding a gift for his mother. He told me she loved Carter's but never felt comfortable coming in because she thought she didn't fit in. He wanted to change that for her." Melissa's heart tightened. "What happened next?" "I helped him pick out a beautiful scarf," Mrs. Daniels said, her voice soft. "And when he left, he thanked me for treating him kindly. He said it was the first time he felt welcomed in a place like this." "That's a powerful story," Melissa said. "Thank you for sharing it." Mrs. Daniels nodded. "The training sessions helped me see my own blind spots. I'm trying to do better, one interaction at a time." Back at headquarters, Melissa shared Mrs. Daniels' story with her senior team. "It's these small moments," she said, "that define who we are as a company. If we can create an environment where everyone feels seen and valued, we're succeeding." Maria chimed in. "I think we should consider spotlighting stories like these in our marketing campaigns. They're authentic, and they show the heart of what we're trying to accomplish." Melissa nodded thoughtfully. "Let's make it happen. But let's be careful. This isn't about optics, it's about authenticity. We're not selling a narrative. We're sharing a reality." As the weeks went on, the stories from Carter's voices continued to pour in, each one a testament to the company's evolving culture. Melissa made it a point to read as many as she could, often finding herself moved by the vulnerability and resilience of her employees and customers. One evening, as she was reviewing the latest submissions, she came across a story from Claire, the young sales associate whose earlier testimonial had caught her attention. This time, Claire wrote about an interaction with a customer who was struggling to find an affordable gift. "I could see the worry in her eyes," Claire wrote. "She kept picking up items and putting them back down. So I asked her if I could help. Together, we found a beautiful piece of jewelry that fit her budget. When she left, she said, 'You don't know how much this means to me.' That moment reminded me why I love working here." Melissa felt a lump rise in her throat as she finished reading. These stories were more than just anecdotes. They were the lifeblood of the company's transformation. One Friday afternoon, Melissa gathered her senior team in the conference room. "We've come a long way," she said, addressing the group. "But this is only the beginning. The changes we've made are planting seeds not just for Carter's, but for the broader community. We have an opportunity to set a new standard in our industry, and I intend to see it through." The room buzzed with quiet determination. That evening, as Melissa walked home through the bustling streets of Chicago, she reflected on the journey so far. The challenges had been immense, but so were the rewards. The spark of hope she had felt weeks ago was now a steady flame, fueled by the stories of transformation and kindness that surrounded her. The work was far from over, but Melissa knew one thing for certain. The seeds they had planted were growing, and the future was full of possibility. Melissa Carter leaned against the glass window of her penthouse, watching the evening lights of Chicago flicker like scattered stars. Her reflection stared back at her, its features softer, less sharp than the public image she had cultivated over the years. This quieter Melissa was still learning to navigate a world where her power as a CEO was tempered by vulnerability. The changes at Carter's had taken root, but she knew there were deeper challenges to address, ones that could make or break the progress they had fought for. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Melissa glanced at the screen and saw a message from Maria. "Great news, customers are loving the new direction. We've surpassed pre-incident sales at our pilot stores. Call me when you have a minute." Melissa smiled. It was the kind of validation she had hoped for since the overhaul began. But even as she celebrated the win, she knew that one success wouldn't be enough to sustain momentum. The breakthrough had to extend beyond numbers. It had to reshape the way people thought and behaved, both inside the company and out. The next morning, Melissa was at her desk early, reviewing a strategy report when Maria and Robert Fields, the head of marketing, walked in. "Morning," Robert began, setting his tablet down on the desk. "We've got something exciting to show you." Maria opened her laptop and projected an image onto the office's large screen. It was a concept for a new ad campaign, featuring real employees and customers sharing their stories. The tagline read, "Carter's, where every voice matters." Melissa leaned forward, studying the images and snippets of testimonials. There was Rachel, the cashier who had embraced the diversity training, smiling as she described helping a hesitant customer. Another featured Claire, the young associate who had found her confidence through the mentorship program. "These are powerful," Melissa said, "authentic and meaningful." "But," Maria and Robert exchanged glances. "But," Maria prompted. Melissa folded her hands. "We have to ensure these stories don't come across as polished narratives. Let's use real words, real voices. People connect with raw honesty more than scripted perfection." Robert nodded. "We'll make it work. These stories are the backbone of the campaign, so they need to feel genuine." Melissa smiled. "Exactly. Let's move forward." In the following weeks, the campaign came to life. Videos featuring employees and customers were shared across social media and aired during prime television slots. Each story highlighted the small but profound changes taking place at Carter's, from moments of kindness at the checkout counter to mentorships that had altered career paths. The public response was overwhelmingly positive. Customers who had once felt excluded began sharing their own stories online, using hashtags like Carter Cares and Voices Matter. Sales soared as people flocked to stores, not just for the products, but for the experience of being part of something bigger. Amid the success, Melissa made time to visit more stores, listening to employees and customers. During one visit, she met a man named Victor, a longtime customer who had stopped shopping at Carter's years ago. "I always loved the quality of your products," Victor told her. "But the atmosphere, it felt like it wasn't for people like me. I'm glad that's changing." "Thank you for coming back," Melissa said sincerely. "What brought you here today?" Victor held up a small, neatly wrapped package. "It's a gift for my wife. She's been hearing about all the changes, and she wanted to see it for herself. You figure the surprise here." Melissa smiled warmly. "I hope she loves it. And if there's anything else we can do to make your experience better, please let me know." Victor nodded, his expression earnest. "Just keep doing what you're doing." Back at headquarters, Melissa held a leadership meeting to discuss the company's progress. Maria shared a detailed report highlighting the impact of the new initiatives. Our customer retention rate is at an all-time high, Maria said. And employee engagement has increased by 30% across all locations. The mentorship program is now at capacity, with a wait list for new participants. Robert added, the ad campaign has been a game changer. People aren't just buying our products, they're buying into our values. It's reshaping the brand's identity. Melissa listened carefully, pride swelling in her chest. This is incredible progress, she said. But we need to remain vigilant. Change is fragile, and we can't let our guard down. Sophie, the head of human resources, chimed in. We've been monitoring the feedback closely. While most of it is positive, there are still some employees struggling to adapt. I recommend we create smaller, peer-led workshops to support them. It might help ease the transition. Let's do it, Melissa agreed. No one gets left behind. One evening, as Melissa was preparing to leave the office, she received a message from Linda Holloway, the retired teacher who had shared her story of unexpected kindness months earlier. The message read, Melissa, I just saw the new Carter's campaign. It brought tears to my eyes. Thank you for carrying the torch forward. Mr. Harris would be proud. Melissa sat back in her chair, her eyes glistening. Linda's words reminded her of the ripple effect of kindness, how one small act could inspire a chain of change. The breakthrough was not just in the numbers or the campaign's success. It was in the stories she heard during her visits, the employees who had found new purpose, and the customers who felt seen and valued for the first time. But Melissa knew the journey wasn't over. The next step was to solidify these changes into Carter's DNA, ensuring that the values they had embraced would endure long after the headlines faded. As she looked out at the city lights that night, Melissa felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't known before. This was more than a business transformation, it was a movement. And for the first time, she felt certain that the seeds they had planted were not just growing, but thriving. Melissa Carter sat in the quiet of her penthouse living room, a glass of water in hand, as the early morning sunlight cast golden streaks across the cityscape. Her days had become a whirlwind of meetings, store visits, and strategy sessions, but this quiet hour was her sanctuary, a time to reflect on the journey so far. The breakthrough they had achieved at Carter's was promising. Stories of change filled her inbox daily, from employees discovering their potential to customers feeling seen and valued for the first time. Yet Melissa couldn't ignore the weight of the remaining challenges. Change was never complete. It was a continuous process that demanded vigilance and adaptability. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Maria. Can you meet at the office by 9? There's something you'll want to see. Melissa replied with a quick, on my way. When she arrived at headquarters, Maria greeted her with a folder in hand and an eager smile. Good morning, Maria said, ushering Melissa into the conference room. What's the good news? Melissa asked, setting her bag down. Maria slid the folder across the table. This came in last night. It's a comprehensive survey from employees and customers, measuring their perception of the changes we've implemented. Melissa opened the folder and scanned the results. The numbers were encouraging. 87% of employees reported feeling more engaged and supported at work. 91% of customers surveyed said they noticed and appreciated the inclusivity efforts. 73% of respondents indicated they were more likely to recommend Carter's to friends and family. This is incredible, Melissa said, her voice tinged with relief. We're finally starting to rebuild trust. Maria nodded. But there's more. Some of the open-ended responses highlight areas where we still need to grow. Melissa read through the comments carefully. While most were positive, a few pointed to lingering resistance among employees and challenges in consistently delivering on their new vision across all locations. These are valid points, Melissa said. We've come far, but we can't let early success breed complacency. What's our plan for addressing these gaps? Maria gestured to a stack of proposals on the table. We're rolling out smaller, peer-led workshops for employees who are still struggling to adapt. We've also created a new monitoring system to ensure all stores are meeting the updated standards. Melissa smiled. That's exactly what we need. Let's move forward with it. Later that week, Melissa visited one of Carter's newly revamped stores on the outskirts of Chicago. The location had been part of the mentorship program and was now seen as a model for other branches. As she walked through the store, Melissa observed employees engaging warmly with customers, guiding them through the aisles with genuine enthusiasm. She spotted Claire, the young sales associate whose story had become a cornerstone of their recent campaign, assisting a family. "That color looks great on you," Claire said to a little girl trying on a scarf. "And it's perfect for this weather." The girl giggled, and her mother beamed. "Thank you," the mother said to Claire. "You've been so helpful." Melissa approached Claire after the family had left. "Claire," she said, "it's great to see you in action. How have things been?" Claire smiled, her confidence evident. "Things have been wonderful, Ms. Carter. I used to feel so out of place here, but now it feels like I'm part of something meaningful. The mentorship program made a huge difference for me." Melissa nodded. "You've come a long way, Claire, and stories like yours remind me why we started this journey." Back at headquarters, Melissa gathered her leadership team to discuss the progress and challenges they faced. The room hummed with focused energy as Maria, Robert, Sophie, and the others shared updates. "We've made significant strides," Robert began. "But competitors are starting to mimic our inclusivity efforts. They're positioning themselves as equally progressive, and we need to stay ahead." Melissa leaned forward. "Our focus has to remain on authenticity. We're not here to compete with slogans or optics. We're here to make real, lasting change. Let's keep emphasizing substance over style." Sophie added, "The peer-led workshops are going well, but there's still some resistance. A few managers are hesitant to embrace the new standards, and we've received complaints about inconsistency in some stores." "Then we double down on accountability," Melissa said firmly. "We've given people time to adjust, but now it's about ensuring everyone is aligned with our mission. Those who can't or won't adapt may need to find a different path." The room fell quiet as her words settled over the team. Finally, Maria spoke. "I agree. This is bigger than any one person. If we're going to sustain this progress, we need full commitment." That evening, as Melissa prepared to leave the office, she received a call from Linda Holloway, the retired teacher who had inspired much of her approach. "Linda," Melissa said warmly, "it's good to hear from you." "I just wanted to check in," Linda replied. "How's everything going?" Melissa hesitated, then said, "We've made progress, but there's still so much to do. Some days it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back." "That's the nature of real change," Linda said. "It's messy, slow, and full of setbacks. But every step forward matters, no matter how small." Linda's words stayed with Melissa as she drove home that night. She thought about the lessons she had learned over the past months, the importance of listening, the power of vulnerability, and the resilience required to challenge the status quo. The next day, Melissa called an all-hands meeting at headquarters. Employees gathered in the main auditorium, their faces reflecting curiosity and anticipation. Melissa stood at the podium, her posture confident but approachable. "Thank you all for being here," she began. "As we reflect on the progress we've made, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the challenges we've faced. Change is hard. It pushes us out of our comfort zones and forces us to confront things we'd rather ignore. But it's also necessary if we want to grow." She paused, letting her words settle. "I've learned so much from all of you during this journey. Your stories, your feedback, and your courage have been invaluable. Together, we're proving that a company can be more than just a place of business. It can be a force for good." The room erupted in applause, and Melissa felt a swell of pride. This was not just her journey, it was theirs. As the week ended, Melissa received a final update from Maria. "We've surpassed our quarterly goals," Maria said with a grin. "Customer loyalty is at an all-time high, and employee retention has improved by 20%. Melissa smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. But she knew this was only the beginning. As she stood by her office window that evening, watching the city lights twinkle, Melissa allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The lessons learned during this journey were not just about business. They were about humanity, resilience, and the power of believing in something greater than oneself. She took a deep breath, her resolve stronger than ever. The road ahead was long, but she was ready. Melissa Carter arrived at Carter's headquarters early that morning, the city still shaking off the haze of dawn. Despite the steady rhythm of progress at the company, a sense of unfinished business tugged at her thoughts. There were gaps that needed mending, bridges she had yet to rebuild. She poured herself a coffee in the break room, her mind turning over the latest reports Maria had shared. The metrics were clear. Customer loyalty and employee engagement were at all-time highs. But Melissa knew success on paper wasn't enough. There were still individuals who had been hurt or alienated during the upheaval of change. Today, she was determined to address one such gap. Her calendar showed a meeting she had been hesitant but resolute in scheduling. Julia Whitman, the former store manager whose actions had sparked the incident that changed everything, had agreed to meet. Julia's swift dismissal after the scandal had been necessary, but it had also left unresolved questions. Melissa had come to believe that accountability was incomplete without an opportunity for understanding. When Julia arrived, Melissa greeted her in the conference room with a polite but reserved smile. Julia looked different than Melissa remembered. Her sharp, confident demeanor had softened, replaced by a subdued air that hinted at reflection. "Thank you for coming, Julia," Melissa said, gesturing for her to sit. Julia nodded, clutching her handbag tightly. "Thank you for reaching out, Ms. Carter. I wasn't sure I'd ever hear from you again." Melissa studied her for a moment. "I've had a lot of time to think about that day, about what it meant for me and for Carter's. But I've also thought about what it meant for you." Julia's eyes dropped to the table. "I made a mistake," she said quietly. "A big one. I let my assumptions guide my actions, and it cost me everything. I don't blame you for what happened. I deserve to be held accountable." Melissa leaned forward, her tone soft but firm. "You did make a mistake, Julia, and it was a painful one for everyone involved. But mistakes can be opportunities for growth, if we're willing to learn from them. Have you thought about what you would do differently?" Julia nodded slowly. "Every day, I've realized how blind I was to my own biases. I never saw myself as someone who judged others unfairly, but looking back, I see it clearly. I've been taking diversity training courses on my own and volunteering with community organizations. It's helped, but it hasn't erased the regret." Melissa sat back, absorbing Julia's words. "I appreciate your honesty. Growth isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning from it and using those lessons to do better." Julia hesitated, then asked, "Why did you ask me here? I thought Carter's had moved on without me." Melissa's gaze was steady. "Because Carter's isn't just about moving on, it's about building bridges. I believe in second chances, Julia, and I'd like to offer you one." Julia's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "I am," Melissa said. "We're launching a new community outreach program as part of our mentorship initiative. It's focused on helping underserved communities access job training and opportunities. I think your experience and your willingness to grow could make you a valuable part of that team if you're ready to take on the challenge." Emotion flickered across Julia's face. Surprise, gratitude, and something like hope. "I would love the chance to make things right," she said softly. Over the following weeks, Julia joined the community outreach team. Her first-hand understanding of mistakes and redemption became an asset, enabling her to connect authentically with participants in the program. Melissa checked in periodically, watching Julia's confidence grow as she embraced her new role. Meanwhile, the mentorship initiative at Carter's continued to thrive. Melissa made a point of attending one of the program sessions, held at a community center in a neighborhood often overlooked by corporate initiatives. The room buzzed with conversation as mentors and ments shared their stories and aspirations. One young man, Marcus, caught Melissa's attention as he spoke passionately about his dream of starting a business. "I've always wanted to open a bakery," Marcus said, his eyes bright, "but I've never known where to start. This program is giving me the tools and the confidence to take that first step." Melissa approached Marcus after the session. "Your story is inspiring," she said. "Have you connected with any of our leadership team about your ideas?" Marcus shook his head. "Not yet, but I'd love to." "Let's make it happen," Melissa said. "I'll personally introduce you to someone who can help." As the weeks passed, stories like Marcus's became emblematic of the broader transformation happening at Carter's. The company's new direction was not only resonating internally, but also creating ripples of change in the communities it served. At headquarters, Maria shared another update during a leadership meeting. Our community outreach programs have reached over 500 participants in the past month, Maria said, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. People are starting to see Carter's as more than just a retail brand. Melissa nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's exactly what we've been working toward. Let's keep expanding the program. I want to ensure that we're not just making an impact, we're sustaining it. One evening, as Melissa reviewed the latest success stories from the mentorship and outreach programs, she received an unexpected message. It was from Greg, the store manager who had once led the employee protest against the company's changes. "Ms. Carter," the message read, "I just wanted to thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in your vision. Seeing the changes in my store and hearing the stories from our customers has opened my eyes. I'm proud to be part of this journey, and I hope I can continue contributing to Carter's growth." Melissa smiled as she read the message. Greg's transformation was a testament to the power of perseverance and dialogue. At the end of a long day, Melissa stood by her office window, gazing out at the city lights. The bridges they had rebuilt between employees, customers, and communities were stronger than ever. But Melissa knew the work was far from over. True transformation required not just action but commitment, and she was ready to lead Carter's into the next chapter. The grand ballroom of a downtown Chicago hotel buzzed with energy. Tonight, Carter's was hosting its annual gala, a celebration of progress and resilience. Employees, community leaders, and customers gathered under sparkling chandeliers, their faces alight with anticipation. For Melissa Carter, this event marked more than just a milestone, it was a moment of redemption. Standing at the edge of the room, Melissa took in the scene. Employees who had once resisted the company's transformation now mingled with enthusiasm, sharing stories and ideas. Community leaders spoke with corporate executives, bridging gaps that had once seemed insurmountable. The air carried a warmth that went beyond the glittering decor. It was the warmth of people coming together for a shared purpose. "Ms. Carter," a voice interrupted her thoughts. Melissa turned to see Greg, the once skeptical store manager, approaching with a tentative smile. "Greg," she said warmly, "I'm glad you could make it." "I wouldn't miss it," he replied. "I just wanted to thank you again for giving me the chance to grow. The changes in my store have been incredible, and I've learned so much along the way." Melissa smiled. "You're part of what makes this work, Greg. Seeing your growth reminds me why we started this journey." Greg nodded, his expression earnest. "It's been worth every challenge. And tonight, well, it feels like we're celebrating something bigger than just a company." Melissa's gaze swept over the crowd. "That's exactly what we're doing." As the evening progressed, Melissa took her place at the podium. The room quieted, the hum of conversation fading as all eyes turned to her. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Tonight, we celebrate a journey that began with a moment of reckoning and has grown into a movement of change." She paused, letting her words settle. "When I stood here a year ago, I spoke about the need for accountability, inclusivity, and transformation. I'll be honest with you, I didn't know if we would succeed. Change is hard. It's messy and uncomfortable, but it's also necessary. And thanks to every person in this room, we've proven that it's possible." The audience broke into applause, but Melissa held up a hand to quiet them. "I want to share a story," she continued. "It's a story about a young woman named Claire, one of our sales associates. When Claire joined Carter's, she wasn't sure if she belonged. She doubted herself, and she doubted whether this company could truly support her. But through our mentorship program, Claire found her voice. Today, she's not just thriving, she's inspiring others." Claire, seated near the front, blushed as the room erupted in cheers. Melissa smiled at her before continuing. "Claire's story is one of many. It's proof that when we invest in people, we create ripples of change that extend far beyond our walls. Carter's is no longer just a company. It's a community that values every voice and every story." She paused again, her gaze sweeping over the room. "But this is not the end. Tonight is a turning point. It's a reminder that the work we've started must continue. Together, we have the power to lead by example and to inspire others to follow. The applause was thunderous as Melissa stepped back from the podium. She felt a wave of emotion rise within her, not just pride, but gratitude for the people who had made this journey possible. After the formalities, Melissa mingled with the crowd. She spoke with employees, customers, and community leaders, each conversation reinforcing her belief in the power of connection. At one point, she found herself speaking with Marcus, the young man she had met at the mentorship session weeks earlier. "Ms. Carter," Marcus said, his excitement palpable, "I wanted to let you know I've started drafting a business plan for my bakery." "That's wonderful," Melissa replied. "What's your next step?" "I'm meeting with one of the mentors next week," he said. "They're helping me refine my ideas and connect with resources." Melissa placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're on the right path, Marcus. And when you're ready to open that bakery, let me know. I'll be your first customer." As the night wound down, Melissa stepped out onto the terrace for a moment of quiet reflection. The city stretched out before her, its lights twinkling like stars. The road to this moment had been long and fraught with challenges, but the progress they had made felt tangible, undeniable. "Quite a night," Maria's voice said from behind her. Melissa turned to see her colleague holding 2 glasses of champagne. She accepted one with a smile. "It is," Melissa agreed, "but it's also a reminder of how far we still have to go." Maria raised her glass. "To the journey ahead." Melissa clinked her glass gently against Maria's. "To the journey ahead." In the days that followed, Carter's continued to build on its momentum. The mentorship and outreach programs expanded, drawing attention from other companies eager to replicate their success. Employees embraced their roles as ambassadors of change, fostering a culture that was both inclusive and empowering. For Melissa, the transformation at Carter's was deeply personal. It wasn't just about rebuilding a brand, it was about redefining what leadership meant. It was about listening, learning, and growing alongside the people she served. One evening, as Melissa prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a new submission to Carter's Voices. She opened it to find a heartfelt story from a customer who had visited one of their stores for the first time. "I walked into Carter's feeling unsure of myself," the story began. "But the way the employees treated me, it was like they saw me, really saw me. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged." Melissa set the phone down, her heart full. This was why she had fought so hard, why she had refused to give up even when the road seemed impossible. As she turned off the light and climbed into bed, she felt a sense of peace. The seeds of change they had planted were flourishing, and the future was bright with possibility. The turning point had come not just for Carter's, but for everyone it touched. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the story of Melissa Carter and the transformation of Carter's. This story reminds us of the power of resilience, the importance of listening, and how small acts of kindness can spark monumental change. Melissa's journey wasn't just about rebuilding a brand, it was about redefining values, fostering inclusivity, and showing us what's possible when we lead with purpose and heart.